Alright, hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to Archi Hacks. And in today's video, we'll be creating this MVRDV style master plan diagram. I'll show you a really different way to achieve this effect. This method allows you to achieve this effect really quickly, but there will be some drawbacks in exchange. So let's explore that. So we're in Rhino, and we'll start from scratch. This tutorial also includes pretty cool modeling technique as well, so make sure to stick around for that. So first off, I'm going to start by creating a rectangle, actually a square, and I'll explode it quickly. And I'll take two curves on the opposite sides and use the command called TweenCurves. And with that, I'm going to add 4 intermediary curves in between to create individual lots for our building. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to create a plane that represents one module. Okay, I'll move on to that. And I'm going to create 5 different modules, so I'll create each layer for that. I'll name each layer and color them respectively. Okay. And I'll assign a rectangle to each. Okay, once that is complete, I'm also going to create houses on top of it. Okay, maybe that's one story. So I'll just double that. I'll go to the side view to create a pitched roof. Close curve and extrude. Oops. All right, once we have a pitch, I'm just gonna go ahead, make this a little bit longer. Okay, I'll combine them together using Boolean union. And then merge all faces to get rid of intermediary lines. And there we go, here's one module. Just gonna duplicate this 5 times for each color. And I'll make sure they're all a little bit different. So in the example, the red is a little bit higher, so do that. But I'll maybe make it a little smaller in this dimension. And you can use that command called MatchLayer to quickly match layer with another object. So first, click on the object that you want to change. And then second, you can click on the layer that you want to match. Okay, we'll quickly do that. Okay, for the gray one, I'm going to create a basic rectangle. Let's do that. Copy. And maybe for purple, what should we do for purple? Let's make this one just a little bit shorter. So I'm gonna go ahead, take these control points, move them up a little bit, and move the whole thing down. Okay, there we go. And I'm gonna establish each of them as a block. And for those blocks, I'm just gonna put them all in the default layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Once you have the two objects selected, you can type in the command called block. And then just make sure to select the consistent point. So I'm going to choose the bottom left or the bottom corner that we see in this perspective and call this a green. And this will be called red. Once that is complete, these are all blocks. Now what's really useful about this block process is that you can now quickly swap them with another one. So we'll keep these as like our template and we'll come back to these later. So I'm going to take one module and duplicate it. And I'm actually going to do this 5 times over here. Okay. And now this is going to represent one city block that we saw. I'm going to choose a point that's a little bit further away from the actual corner here. and use that as a point of rotation for polar array. So I'm going to type in the command array polar. Okay, there we go. We've created this pinwheel arrangement for our apartment blocks. And now I'm going to go ahead and do this one more time. So before we delete this polyline, I'm going to move this over and take our existing layout and type in array polar. Let's do that again. There we go. Now we created this 4x4 city block and each block containing 5 apartments. Now what we can do now is to select the random blocks that you want to transform and swap them out with another module that is not green. So for example, I'll make these selections and type in the command replace block. And it'll prompt you to select more blocks if you want it. But for now, I'm going to say no to that. And then we can choose a block that we want to replace it with. So for this one, I'm going to choose the gray module. And as you can see, now those selected blocks have turned into a gray one. We'll repeat this process until we have a nicely distributed urban arrangement. Okay, we'll replace block again. And then this time I'll choose purple. Okay, that seems pretty good. I'm just going to make sure all the blocks aren't right at the edge. So I'm going to move them in a little bit. I think it might be a nice idea to move them a little bit off from each other so that there's a bit of irregularity. Okay, here we go. As you can see, any changes that we make in these blocks are reflected in our urban master plan as well. So moving onwards, it'll be nice to kind of keep them in one side just like this, and then come back to it later on. So for now, I'm going to leave it at that and start setting up our view. So in the diagram example that we saw, they're using an axonometric perspective. And in order to achieve that, I'm going to click on this little arrow here, go to Set View, Isometric, and we'll choose Southwest. Okay, now we get this parallel perspective. And I'll just quickly save this as a default view so we can come back to this later. So in this demonstration, we're not actually going to take this into Illustrator because the scale of the project is a little too big and it becomes a little bit of work to kind of color them in individually. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use render channels. We'll open up our asset editor and create several materials. So we'll go ahead, create a generic one. And then we'll call this, and we'll create one color for each layer. So this will be green. I'll go ahead and duplicate. And we'll rename them by double clicking on their names. And we actually only have to set up one parameter, and that is not diffuse. We're going to go open up advanced settings by clicking on this little slider. And this will display additional options for us. And then there, we're going to go into material ID and make the ID color reflect the color that each layer represents. So for blue, I'm going to choose a blue. And this is the color that we're going to be using. So if you could, choose the color that you want to have in your final result. And for the other ones, I'll repeat the process. Okay, that looks really good. And I'm going to go ahead and apply these to the corresponding layers. Apply this to blue. This will be green. So it might be a little bit tedious in the beginning, but this will all pay off in the end. All right, once that is complete, we're almost there. I'm going to set up two render channels. First is the material ID color, and the second is the normal map. Now once that's done, we'll just turn this into slightly higher resolution render, 1920 by 1080. Now one thing that's a little bit off from the example that we saw is that all the long colors are same as the building color. So let's bring that back. So in order to do so, I'm going to go ahead, bring our sample blocks back by typing in the command show. And once they're in, I'm going to double click into them to edit them. I'm going to take each lawn area and put them into a new layer called lawn. And I'll make the color green just for visibility's sake. Okay. And I'll repeat this process. So once that's done, I'm going to go into the V-Ray settings and create a new material just for the lawn. Let's go to generic. And we'll call this lawn. And likewise, I'm going to go into advanced settings and change the material ID into a green color. Okay, before we forget, I'm going to right click and apply this to our lawn layer and then hit render. Okay, once that is complete, we'll long click on the save button and save it as a separate file and save this into our project folder. Okay, once the renders are saved, I'm going to change the viewport into pen view mode. And with the default settings, I'm going to type in ViewCaptureToFile. And then here, I'm going to choose the same setting as our rendering, 1920 by 1080, and save this into the same folder. And I'll name this line work. Once that is complete, we are ready to switch over to Photoshop. In Photoshop, we're going to pull them into one Photoshop file. So I'll create a new file with the same dimension, 1920 by 1080, and say OK. And I'll simply drag and drop all the files. For some reason, the line work is a little small, so I'm gonna scale this up. Okay. Now I'm gonna right click and rasterize this. And in fact, I'm gonna rasterize all three layers. So click them all, right click and rasterize layer. Once that is done, we can take the line work layer, hit Ctrl-I on your keyboard to turn the lines white. And once that's done, I'm gonna go ahead and create a hue saturation layer to remove any color from our normal map. Okay, that looks good. I'll bring out our material ID and set the blending mode as color. Now, the result may not look as you originally wanted. So what you can do is using the magic wand tool with the contiguous checked off, click on a layer to select same layers throughout this material ID channel. And now you can choose any kind of adjustments to modify your color until it looks right. So for example, I'm going to change all these green color into orange. So I'll hit Ctrl-U to bring up hue and saturation and turn this over until this looks right. So I'll do something like that. And I realized that the background is a little too dark, so I'm going to create a new curves layer, and I'll create a few control points up here to keep them the same. But I'll just bring up the bottom control point to only make the bottom part bright. Okay, until that looks about right. I'm going to hue and saturation, bring up the lightness a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's a little too orangey, so I'm going to bring them back into yellow. Okay, that's good. The purple looks a little too pink, so I'm going to do the same thing with the Ctrl-U. I'm going to bring this down a little bit, maybe slightly less saturated. Red is a little too pink as well, so I'm going to make it slightly redder. And increase the saturation. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now you can go ahead and use some Photoshop brushes to add some trees and entourage. So in order to do so, I'm going to go ahead and go over to this website called Architutes. You can access it by typing in architutes.com. I'll leave the link in the description. You can go into the resources tab and they have a bunch of free resources as well as paid ones. But today's tutorial, we're going to use the free ones. So I'm going to go ahead and download some of these people and tree brushes. I'm going to click on Show It Better's tree brushes, and I'll type in 0 on the price, add to cart. I'll get the Sana brush set and add that to our cart as well. Once that is done, I can choose checkout and write down my email to get it. And once that is done, you'll get the download links and you can download them all. Once you have them downloaded to your computer, you can head back to Photoshop. And on a new layer, we'll be adding those people. So before we do that, we're going to import those brushes by right-clicking and choosing this gear icon. Choose load brushes. And head over to the directory where you saved the brushes and import them. So we have to do them one by one. Okay, once that is done, for some reason the default brush is a little bit funny. It kind of like puts people in random rotation. So I'm going to head over to our brushes tab. You can bring this up by hitting F5. And if you have the brush selected, you can change some of the options here. So for us, I'm going to turn off the shape dynamics. And we'll actually turn up the scattering a little bit. All right, that's a little too many people. And I'll actually just make sure that the brush size isn't too big. So reduce the size. Let's increase the spacing a little bit more. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to change our foreground color to red. And start brushing people in. So you can click once to add individual people, or you could also drag to add multiple people in. Right now, it seems like there are too many people, so I'm going to go back into our brush settings and increase the spacing a lot. Still looks a little too big, so I'm going to do like 500. Okay, that looks pretty good. And wherever you need, you can just like kind of like drag and start populating. And if you also click, it'll just place one person exactly where you want them. And when you drag, it'll kind of like randomly place them around the vicinity of your mouse cursor. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to change the brush tip to another person. Reduce the size. Okay, 13. Okay, I'll use 13 and use 590 as our spacing. And so that we can add some diversity to the people. Although it's subtle, I'm sure the detail will pay off in the end. And we'll do something similar, and you can use the eraser tool to remove any mistakes that you make. So this person, actually someone on the rooftop looks pretty cool, but maybe this person needs to go. All right, I might be missing a few, but let's go on just for demonstration purpose. I'll name this people, and I'm gonna go ahead and create one more layer for trees. So for this layer, I'm gonna use the other set of brushes. Scroll down and choose a generic looking tree. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'll scale this down a lot until it's the right size. That looks pretty small. Make it a little too bigger. Okay, that looks good. Okay, and for these, I'm gonna use slightly dark green so we can distinguish it from our lawn color. And maybe I'll make it a little bit bluer as well. Okay. And I'll start brushing in with a similar technique. And for trees, it might be interesting to vary the sizes of them. So I'm going to go back to our brush settings, go into shape dynamics, and reduce the angle jitter to 0, but make the size jitter 100% with the minimum diameter to about 60%. Now what this allows us to do is every time you use the brush, the size will be slightly different. It'll vary between 100% to 60% of the size that you have given. So as you can see, for some reason the trees are upside down sometimes. I'm gonna go ahead, try fixing that. I think it's the flip jitters, so I'm gonna turn those off. And there we go. We're back in game. I'm gonna go back, increase the spacings a little bit as before. And I'm actually going to add some randomness to it. Random color. So I'm gonna go into color dynamics and choose a secondary color as our background. So what's gonna happen now is that Photoshop is gonna choose a color between these two whenever you click. And yeah, now create trees with random colors too. So I'll go ahead and start brushing in. We can always go back and change our mistakes. So I'll just continue brushing first. Some happy little trees in front of each lawn. Would be kind of nice to have a tree in every house, eh? And now our proposal starts to look very lively. Looks like a kind of place that you want to raise family and live for a long time, which is perfect for most clients. I think clients usually look for kind of nice looking environment as their proposal. Unless your boss is Rem Koolhaus, he probably wants everyone to die in some concrete boxes. I didn't say that. Like these small things actually add so much to your drawings. Just a simple change like that. Okay. And there will be times when you want to put a tree kind of like hanging slightly between. So when that happens, I'm going to take the eraser tool and erase the part that kind of like overlaps the building. Okay, there we go. Now I'll do that same thing over here as well. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to group these into an entourage layer. Oh yeah, make sure to kind of like group your layers and name them properly. Your coworkers will thank you for that. Okay, and I'm going to double click on the tree layers to add a bit of a outer stroke. So we'll click on the stroke, make the size just 1 pixel, and make the color white. They stand out a lot more, right? I'm actually going to reduce the opacity just a little bit to make it stand out a little bit less. That looks pretty good. And if you want to move them a little bit, you can select it with the Marquee tool. And using the black arrow tool, you can move those trees over. There we go. It's possible that I'm missing some of them, but make sure to do it just right for your own proposals. All right, I've shown you most of the tips that I want to share today, but if you want to stick around and check out the rest of adding slightly more details to it, please feel free to do that. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and vary the lawn colors just a little bit. So in order to give different colors to each lawn, I'm going to go into the line work layer and using the magic wand tool with contiguous on, I'll start selecting random lawns. If you hold down shift or enable this multiple selection option, you can select multiple boxes at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead, kind of like choose random lawns to kind of like green up a little bit. I think it'll be nice consistency to make sure that the front and back lawns are selected together. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to go head over to our material ID layer because this layer is actually giving us all the colors. I might even rename this as color layer. All right, with the same technique, I'm going to hit Control-U and maybe give these ones slightly darker green color. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'll go back to the line work layer and do this one more time. If you misclick anywhere, you can always use Control-Z to go back. All right, sweet. That is ready. I'm going to go back to our color layer and hit Control-U. And this time I'm going to make them a little bit yellower. And there we go. Here's our MVRDV style master plan. always make sure that you're using the right technique for the purpose. In this example, I'm using Photoshop and raster graphics to speed up our process, but this also comes in with the disadvantage of being unable to scale in the future. So choose your poison and get to drawing. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.